Season's greetings, listeners, and welcome to Rose Red Storytime. Please, step closer to the fire, get cozy in your favorite chair, relax, and enjoy. Tonight's story is brought to us by Reddit user Dave Mustaine's Toenail. Now, admittedly, that name grabbed my attention, but it was the story that was written that kept it. Tonight, we are going to delve into a bit of the mysterious, a little bit of the unknown, and we are going to question our reality. So without further ado, I bring you 72 Hours. We arrived at midnight. I tasted salt and the bitter flavor of medication as the woman in the back of the ambulance unbuckled me from the stretcher. "You good?" she asked gently. I didn't reply. "Can you please hold your hands behind your back?" With a deadened gaze, I complied with her orders. The dull thud of a distant Rammstein song swam in and out of my brain like a swarm of locusts. I thought it was in my head, but the ambulance driver switched off the radio and the song stopped. I shuffled down the sidewalk toward the rear door of the mental hospital, and the woman accompanied me, gripping my shoulder with caution but firmness. A nurse opened the door, and the man spoke briefly with her. I wasn't really paying attention. I unfocused my eyes and stared out at the towering, skeletal trees that loomed over the edge of the sidewalk. My parents had called me earlier. If I did it all right, I could go home in 72 hours. All I had to do was eat and sleep and go to group therapy. They said they were sorry. They said they wanted to see me again. When the nurse opened the door wider, she invited me in with the kind of grimace smile that people do when they drive over roadkill. The first thing they did was the regular procedural tests. A gray-haired doctor beckoned me into a small room in the hall. His name tag was turned the wrong way, so I couldn't read it. He passed me a lavender hospital gown. "Please change, and then I need to take your blood." I nodded bleakly. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but he watched me attentively as my trembling hands fumbled with my clothes. He didn't let me keep any of my clothes except my shirt. I had strings in my jacket and sweatpants, and I guess you could hang yourself with them or strangle yourself. I averted my eyes as he began to numb the inner joint of my elbow. "You can close your eyes," he muttered. Instead, I watched, unblinking, as the dark blood ran up the narrow tube. It looked black in the fluorescent light. The doctor stared at it greedily, examining the slick contents as they gathered in a small glass container. Then he put a little white band around my wrist with my name, my medication, and my doctor on it. There was a lot of fucked up stuff going on there. But first things first, I guess. Our rooms were kind of dark, even in the daytime, because the window was all blurred out, so we couldn't see outside. Every now and then, though, the ambulance would bring in a new person, and the blurred window would light up like fireworks on a summer night, and vivid red and blue danced all over the floor. My roommate said they looked pretty. I had 3 roommates. I'll call them Natalie, Diane, and Rachel. Natalie was sleeping when I arrived since it was late. I was afraid they'd be psycho. But the other 2 were actually pretty all right. Both of them were in the hospital for anger management. Diane fought at school, and Rachel had threatened to kill her mom. They told me that Natalie was there because of a drug addiction, which was kind of sad because she was the youngest. The first night was sort of fun. We filled the cracks in the wall with toothpaste and peeled the stickers off our wristbands and put them on the wall over our beds. "I've been here 4 times, Rachel claimed with satisfaction. "I like to leave my mark." She pointed to the ceiling, where her name had been written with a shaky, dull pencil. All the pencils at the hospitals were really dull. You can probably guess why. The stuff that sucked the most were the weird rules. No walking in the hallways after 10. No touching other patients. And you couldn't use the restrooms to brush your teeth or wash your face unless a nurse was watching you. It also sucked in the usual ways. The shower water was cold. We washed our bodies with what looked like hand soap, and we could only go outside for half an hour a day. Everything ran on a tight schedule. You woke up at a certain time, ate at a certain time, and went about all the usual activities. Rachel explained everything to me. Visiting hours were at 2 in the afternoon, if you were lucky enough to have visitors. Most visitors were only able to be there for about 20 minutes before they were removed, and other visitors cycled in. If you wanted to talk to someone outside of those hours, you could use the hall phones, but only for 10 minutes, and your call was monitored. The first time I called my parents was when I met Lily. "There she is." Natalie grabbed my elbow and nodded subtly toward a girl at the end of the hall. "Rachel said she's been here at least 3 weeks, probably longer. I didn't even know they could keep us for that long," she whispered to me, and I nodded. "What's wrong with her?" I whispered back. "I think she's got like schizophrenia or something. When Rachel got here a few weeks ago, she was pretty okay, but then she got juiced and had to go into the white room." The white room was the word we used for the last room at the end of the hall. It's like solitary confinement, except for 15-year-old kids who shoot heroin instead of serial killers. As one might assume from the name, the whole room is white, and the door doesn't have a window like the other doors do. We know it's white because they leave it open in the morning so Lily can get her clothes and stuff. There's only one bed in there, in the middle of the room, like a lonely marble altar. I think I'd go crazy too if I was in the white room. Anyway, on the first morning, I was calling my parents on the hall phone. I cried a lot when I heard my mom's voice, which sucked because Natalie was standing next to me and had to pretend she didn't see that my nose was all runny and I was making those little weird hiccuping breaths that you make when you try to hold back your tears. I was sort of okay though, considering some tall guy next to me was crying too. Midway through my call, Lily started shrieking at the top of her lungs from a chair stationed outside her room. She looked me dead in the eyes and screamed, "Tell them to get us out of here! This is hell! This is hell!" A nurse rested his hand on her shoulder. She nimbly sprung up. Lily's voice was all slow and drugged up, sort of like she was gargling molasses. "Don't fucking touch me! Please, I just want to go home. Please just take me home." The nurse tried to hush her again, and this time she sat down and started giggling to herself. "Lily just likes to yell to scare the callers. Don't worry about it," the nurse assured me. "Who's screaming? Are you okay?" My mom pelted me with questions from the other end of the line. I hung up. Visiting hours went okay. I saw Rachel leave in the hall and gather up all her stuff. She waved at me through the door in the window. Her grandma's arms were wrapped tightly around her waist. I felt kind of rotten, like acid inside me was just dissolving everything away, and I'd just be a husk with skin that would collapse on it in itself. My mom told me to be good, that she wasn't mad at me anymore. I just said, "All right," to all of her questions, and left. Then it was outside time. There was a courtyard in the middle of the facility, and a basketball hoop, a vending machine, and a few benches. I was looking forward to see trees or grass, but there wasn't any. "The adult ward is over there," Natalie said, jabbing a thumb at the opposite side of the courtyard. A locked door with a window set into it was the only boring thing interrupting the gray walls. "Want to go check it out?" I eagerly agreed. We stood up on a bench and looked through the little window in the door. The adult hallways were pitch black. I didn't really know what I was expecting to see, but that definitely wasn't it. Why didn't they keep the lights on during the day? The sunlight streamed in through the tiny window and left a bright rectangle on the ground inside, like a white tile. We watched for no more than half a minute. Nothing happened. Natalie hopped down from the bench and went to play basketball. I turned my head to look away when motion caught the corner of my eye. An old lady ambled down the adults' hall. Her hair was silk white and caught the slightest bit of light from the windows. Then, the impossible. Her pace quickened abruptly, and she scrambled as she launched herself toward the little bit of light on the ground. In the instant before she entered the light, I saw her face. Skinless. It was a contoured mess, as if someone had taken a knife and just peeled her skin back ever so slightly, as if it was molded by somebody who doesn't quite know what the human face should look like. Before I could look away, she was in the light. Now her face was normal, wrinkled and haggard, but no different than somebody's grandma. She walked away and out of sight. If my stomach was feeling bad before, it was twisting itself in knots now. I tried to play it off. Natalie and I climbed on the top of the vending machine when the supervisor was gone. We were trying to see the tops of the trees, but for some reason all we saw was a drab, sickly yellow sky. I wondered where all the trees had went, because I remember seeing them all lined up next to the sidewalk. That night was bad. When we came back from dinner, we heard a massive crash. Diane had punched a gaping, jagged hole through the window. When I turned the light on in our room, Diane was just standing there, barefoot, with the floor covered in shards of glass. She didn't meet my eyes. She walked right through the glass shards as if it were nothing, then up to the nurse's office. My hands were trembling so much that I thought my veins would burst. I wasn't watching Diane. I was watching the window. Instead of trees or ambulances or buildings outside, through that broken window, I saw empty space. It's sort of hard to describe now that I'm trying to find the right words for it. When I was a kid, my mom used to breed mealworms to feed our chameleons. The empty space looked like the mealworms in that dish, kind of, but dark and fast instead of pale and lethargic. The darkness pulsated. For some reason, all I could think of was the worm, before a nurse pulled me back into the hall and sent me to an empty room. I didn't say anything after that. I just waited in the group room until they told me and Natalie to move into a different room for the night. Diane went to the white room. I don't know where Lily went that night. The nurses gathered us all up in the group room and told us that we couldn't go out and walk around, especially tonight, because something was going on. "It's got in. It's inside now," Lily told me. The nurse next to her shot her a pensive look, so I pretended that I didn't hear it and kept scribbling on the table. I don't like the group room. It made me depressed, because they'd hang up all the kids' drawings and writings and stuff, and some of them would say shit like, "Don't let your mom tell you you're worthless," or "You don't need drugs." I thought that was kind of ironic, considering the facility was the ones giving us the drugs in the first place, practically for everything. After that night, all the events kind of got out of order and jumbled up, like when you put a puzzle together and it fits, but it's still the wrong piece anyway. Speaking of which, on the second morning, I got really sick. Earlier, the nurses had given me some kind of medication the night before so I'd sleep easier after the whole trauma involving Diane. Thinking about Diane in the white room made me feel more sick. I threw up a lot of black, sticky stuff. It was disgusting. Natalie wanted to see my vomit because I told her it was super weird, but the nurse said only one person could be in the restroom at a time, so she just waited outside while I kept hacking up the nasty stuff. During the visiting hours, both of my parents came this time. I tried talking to them more so they'd know I was okay, but they seemed a little out of it too. I asked them to bring me clothes so I wouldn't have to wear the hospital gown. It got kind of cold at night, you know? They told me they'd bring me some tomorrow. So I asked how Anna was doing, my sister. and they just stared at me blankly. "Oh, she's doing fine," my mother finally managed. "Is she winning?" I asked eagerly. Anna was really good at volleyball, and she was playing in a tournament today. Winning what?" my mom inquired, distracted as she studied me. It was a calculated stare, the kind that the teacher gives you in middle school when they know you have the answer, but you aren't raising your hand. The tournament?" "Yes, of course. Yes, she's pretty okay." I was relieved when visiting hours were over. My parents looked really sick and sad. It was difficult to bear. My mom's face was pale and almost swollen, and my dad's eyes were sunken and feverish. Diane didn't come to visiting hours. A nurse was the one that found Diane. She was hanging from the curtain rod in the showers. She'd tied a few sheets together to do it, I think, but that's just what another girl told me. I didn't see the whole thing going down, since it happened right after I went to bed. But Natalie was still up, and she said she saw them rush Diane's body out. The doctors held a group session, and they said they didn't know if Diane would make it. But we should send our best wishes anyway, and use her as an example of what happens when you're victim to the intrusive voices inside your head. That was kind of a creepy way of talking about intrusive thoughts, but I guess the doctor was right. For some reason, it sounds awful, I know, but I couldn't bring myself to feel anything for Diane. I mean, yeah, I felt pretty bad for her, but I thought that I should have felt something more. I told the doctor, and he said that wasn't bad. It was just the shock. He smiled at me real sympathetically, but it looked like the sort of smile a wife gives their husband after they lace their tea with cyanide, the sort that doesn't reach your eyes. So I didn't smile back. The next day was my last day, and it was the worst. I woke up late and skipped breakfast. I didn't take the medication that they gave me. I just hid it under my tongue and spat it out in the trash when I got back into my room. The flavor it left was kind of bittersweet, a mixture of grape cough syrup and dirt. There were tiny writhing worms in the trash can when I checked it later, like the little white pill was some disgusting egg. I told the nurse, and thankfully they brought me a new trash can. I didn't think about Diane. All I could think about was the worms, and how gross it was that I might have swallowed them the other day. My parents only visited for a bit. They chatted with me briefly, then pulled out the clothes they'd brought me. It was really odd because I couldn't recognize any of the clothing as my own. I thought maybe I was going a little crazy, but then my mom showed me this old-fashioned dress, and I knew for sure I'd never owned a dress like that in my life. It had all these suspicious-looking stains on it, too. Not blood stains, but like grass stains, as if they dug it up from somewhere. I took the dress, and I stuffed it into my drawer with the other clothes that definitely weren't mine, and just kept wearing the hospital gown. Everything progressed pretty normally. Natalie went home late in the afternoon, and she seemed really excited about it. I was sad to see her go, because now I was in the room by myself. Lily had taken up residence in the White Room. Again. Everything was back to how it was before, except I was super bored and lonely and tired. I wasted time watching the nurses through the little door window for a while. Sometimes their faces would swim in and out of my vision. I never managed to remember any of them or recognize any of their faces. It was like they were shifting, as if there were a million people working at the facility and you never got the same ones twice. That's really what was starting to bother me on the final evening. The nurses made new faces for themselves. I was sure of it, just like that old lady in the adult ward. I don't know why it took me so long to realize it, but everything was so foreign at first, and the nurses were the last thing I was thinking of. Everything started going downhill when a nurse came in before dinner and told me to take my medication. "I know you didn't take this," she said firmly. "It's not so bad, you know. Just down it with water. See how small it is?" Her fingers unfurled like tendrils. revealing the oblong white egg pill. "I don't need it. It makes me sick," I insisted in reply. "Okay, suit yourself, but you'll have to take it later," she retorted, marching off. I know she put that ugly, smooth pill in my food. I just know it. That night, I was vomiting again. But instead of Natalie waiting in the doorway of the restroom, the nurse watched me intently as I choked up what little food I'd eaten in the past 2 days. I could hear Lily screaming from far away, like she did every night, and it started getting darker, and I shuddered. We all pretended to ignore it, but I know everyone else heard it too. That was the exact moment when I decided to make a run for it. When the nurse closed the door to lead me outside the restroom, I slammed my hands against her shoulders, toppling her and pressing past her. With ridiculous speed for a woman of her age, she grabbed my wrist with an iron grip. Her hand clutched my wristband, and I slipped it off, sprinting away as adrenaline ran through my veins like motor oil. I opened the door to the adult ward and already knew that I was lost. Hallways stretched out on either end. Which way had I entered? There was no way the facility was this big. I took a sharp right turn and was met with a dead-end door. The nurse was still pursuing me. I opened the door with a manic fury and slammed it closed behind me, panting. It only took me a moment for my eyes to adjust. And I wasn't alone. Scattered across the floor, about a dozen bodies lay in a neat array. A few of their faces I recognized. A girl who'd left on my first day, Natalie, and Diane, who was propped up against the wall as if she were sitting down. They were in organized rows, as if you were in kindergarten and learning how to count. The stench of rot filled my nostrils, and my brain boiled with nausea. The corpses festered in the humid fume of decay. The white worms were everywhere. They devoured the walls, covered the floor. The entire space beat to the heart of the worms, a rancid collective of long, pale threads. The little room was like a cage full of oily rat carcasses. The girl's hair glistened in the half-light coming from a window on the other side of the room. The moment I heard the door open behind me, I took off for the window and leapt, slamming my heels through the glass as it gave way under my weight. My eyes were shut tightly, blood ran down my leg, and I wasn't sure where it was coming from. I looked back up at the window, but there was no window, no room, no facility. Trees framed an empty lot, basking in the dim glow of the yellow street lamps. I checked the time on my watch. It was midnight. My family still doesn't believe this story, and honestly, I don't blame them. I've stopped believing it too, to some extent. I'm safe now. I guess I had wandered the streets for a while in a daze until someone called the police. I had a nasty cut on my knee from the glass, and the doctors said there was glass in my hair and my palms, but they didn't know how it got there. My parents claimed they never visited me and that I'd never been to a hospital. They said that I went missing one night. There was no suicide attempt, no ambulance, no mental hospital. But I know better. In the back of my mind, I remember it all so clearly that it can't possibly have been a dream. My every waking moment is still haunted by those faceless nurses and the worms. Oh God, the fucking worms. I see them everywhere. I think that's why I'm writing this. I want to remember what happened. I want to remember that it was real. Once again, a big shout out to everyone who has helped me keep this going. To the horror community as a whole, you have all been extraordinarily supportive. To your maker, who has been helping me with the mic issues I've been having all week. And of course, to my loving, extraordinary husband who has been so patient with me as I have gone through all the frustrations of the mic issues and the editing process. So, until next time, dear listeners, stay safe. But remember, even the dead can tell stories.